Title: Trapped Behind Bars, the Untold Reality of America's Forgotten Prisoners. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. The story begins. The boy who vanished behind bars. It began, as many American tragedies do, with a simple accusation. In May 2010, a 16-year-old from the Bronx named Khalif Browder was walking home from a party with his friend when police stopped them. A man had just reported that his backpack had been stolen, and when the officers spotted Khalif, young, black, and poor, they claimed he fit the description. Khalif insisted he had done nothing wrong. There were no stolen items on him, no evidence, no witnesses who could clearly identify him. Yet within minutes, his hands were cuffed, his freedom gone, and his fate sealed in a system that would forget him for years. At the precinct, Khalif expected the misunderstanding to be cleared up. He had never been in trouble with the law before and assumed the truth would come out. But the police charged him with robbery, grand larceny, and assault. Because his family could not afford the $3,000 bail, the court sent him to Rikers Island, one of the most violent jails in the United States. His mother tried everything: loans, appeals, begging lawyers to help, but the system moved too slowly or not at all. For a teenager still in high school, Rikers was another planet. Overcrowded cells, the constant sound of metal doors slamming, the screams of men fighting for survival. Days turned into weeks, then months. His court date kept getting postponed, 17 times in total. The case file bounced between prosecutors and judges, none willing to dismiss it, none willing to take responsibility. Khalif sat in a cell waiting for a trial that never came. "I didn't steal anything," he would tell anyone who would listen. But few did. In the eyes of the system, he was just another inmate number. Inside Rikers, violence was routine. Gangs controlled the cell blocks and guards often joined in. Surveillance footage later revealed correctional officers standing by, or even participating, as young inmates were beaten. Khalif was targeted for refusing to join a gang. He was jumped, stabbed, and humiliated repeatedly. He tried to defend himself, but every fight only led to more punishment. The warden labeled him a troublemaker and sent him to solitary confinement, a 6-by-8 foot box with no human contact for 23 hours a day. He was 16 years old. In that tiny cell, time lost meaning. He talked to himself to stay sane. He did push-ups, counted the cracks on the wall, recited prayers, and imagined his mother's voice. Letters from home came occasionally, but visits were rare. The island was hard to reach, and security procedures made family contact nearly impossible. "They treat you like you're not human," he later said in an interview. "You start to believe maybe you aren't." Outside the walls, no one knew his story. He was one of thousands held on minor charges simply because they were poor, the invisible majority of America's pretrial detainees. But Khalif's case was different in one way. He refused every plea deal offered to him. Prosecutors repeatedly said, "Take the deal, go home." But Khalif refused to plead guilty to something he didn't do. That quiet act of defiance cost him years of his life. By the time he turned 19, he had spent 3 years in jail without trial, 2 of them in solitary confinement. In those years, he missed birthdays, holidays, and the funeral of a family member. When the case finally collapsed in 2013, after the accuser left the country and prosecutors admitted they had no evidence, Khalif was quietly released. No apology, no compensation, just a bus ticket home. He returned to a world that had moved on without him. His friends had graduated, his neighborhood had changed, and he struggled to find work because of the record that still haunted him. But Khalif tried to rebuild his life. He enrolled in community college, spoke publicly about his experience, and joined movements calling for bail reform. His courage drew the attention of journalists and activists. People began to realize that his story was not unique. It was the reflection of a broken system that punishes poverty more than crime. Yet behind his calm voice and hopeful words, something had changed forever. The silence of solitary had left scars that couldn't be seen. Nightmares, paranoia, and depression followed him like shadows. "I'm not all right," he confessed in one interview. "I'm messed up, but I'm trying." Khalif Browder's story was only beginning to reach the world, but the price he had already paid was one no young man should ever have to bear: the system that failed him. When Khalif Browder stepped out of Rikers Island in 2013, the world he entered was one he barely recognized. The hum of city buses, the chatter of pedestrians, the simple sight of people walking freely, all of it felt foreign. He was only 20 years old, but he carried the weight of a man who had lived several lifetimes in confinement. For most people, freedom means relief. For Khalif, it meant confusion. The noise of New York felt too loud, the space around him too open. In solitary, every movement had been controlled, every sound predictable. Now each honk, shout, or sudden touch triggered flashes of panic. He would sometimes jolt awake at night, convinced he was still locked in that 6x8 cell. At first, his story went largely unnoticed. No cameras were waiting for him at the gate, no reporters eager for interviews. Khalif was just another forgotten young man released from jail without a trial, one of thousands. He returned to his mother's small apartment in the Bronx, where he tried to rebuild himself piece by piece. He enrolled at Bronx Community College, studying hard and dreaming of becoming more than what Rikers had turned him into. But the past followed him everywhere. The trauma of solitary confinement had carved invisible wounds. He would avoid crowds, stay up late pacing, and struggle with trust. The sound of metal doors, an elevator gate, a locker clanging shut, would make his heart race. His mother noticed how he would sit for hours in silence, staring at nothing, lost somewhere between memory and fear. Then something changed. In 2014, a journalist from The New Yorker, Jennifer Gonnerman, reached out after hearing about a young man who had spent 3 years in jail without trial. Khalif agreed to speak. The resulting article, Before the Law, was explosive. It laid bare the failures of the American criminal justice system, how a teenager could vanish into a violent jail for years simply because his family couldn't pay a few $1,000s in bail. The story spread like wildfire. National media outlets picked it up. Late-night hosts, civil rights leaders, and politicians began to ask the same question. How could this happen in the United States? Khalif, who once felt invisible, suddenly became a symbol of injustice. He was invited to interviews, panels, and rallies. But behind every public appearance was a young man still battling the ghosts of Rikers. He spoke softly, avoiding eye contact, yet his words carried power. "I didn't do anything wrong," he told one interviewer. "I just wanted my day in court." His case reignited the debate over America's cash bail system, which traps thousands of poor people in jail for minor offenses while wealthier defendants walk free. Activists began calling for reform, using Khalif's name as a rallying cry. Documentaries and television segments featured his story. Celebrities like Jay-Z and Rosie O'Donnell publicly voiced support, funding awareness campaigns and legal reform initiatives. Even politicians took notice. Then President Barack Obama cited the injustice of long-term solitary confinement and referenced Khalif's case when announcing federal prison reform efforts. New York lawmakers began reviewing bail laws and conditions inside Rikers Island. For the first time in decades, public pressure was forcing the system to look inward. But while the world debated policies, Khalif still lived with the aftermath. The spotlight didn't heal him, it only made the pressure heavier. He tried therapy, medication, and prayer, but the anxiety and depression deepened. He once told a friend, "People say I'm free, but I still feel trapped in my own head." Despite this, Khalif continued to fight for change. He met with activists and students, sharing his story to prevent others from suffering the same fate. "If I survived it," he said, "maybe I can help someone else." His bravery inspired thousands. Schools invited him to speak about resilience, courage, and injustice. Yet the toll was becoming unbearable. The years of isolation had rewired his mind. He struggled to connect, to trust, to sleep. He often felt like the system had not only stolen his youth but his sense of safety. Even at home, surrounded by family, he felt as if the walls were closing in. Still, Khalif tried to hold on. "I'm not a quitter," he told his mother, but she could see the pain behind his words. Each time she looked into his eyes, she saw the same fear she saw the day he was taken away at 16. By 2015, Khalif's story had reached every corner of America. He had become a face of reform, the proof of what happens when justice is delayed, denied, or forgotten. Lawmakers began drafting bills bearing his name. The Khalif Browder Foundation was founded to help young men trapped in similar situations. But as momentum grew, so did the weight on his shoulders. The same story that had brought him attention was also a constant reminder of the nightmare he could never escape: the cost of silence. By 2015, Khalif Browder's name had become a symbol across America. His story had forced politicians, judges, and the public to confront the cracks in a justice system that had quietly swallowed thousands like him. He had been invited to universities, spoken alongside activists, and met influential leaders. To many, Khalif was a survivor, living proof that resilience could triumph over cruelty. But behind that calm, serious face, he carried something that few could see: a deep and unhealed wound. Years of isolation had left him scarred in ways the human eye couldn't trace. He struggled with insomnia, anxiety, and flashbacks. The simple sound of keys rattling could send him spiraling into panic. He once told his mother, "It's like I'm still in that cell, Ma. Even when I'm outside, I can't get out." His mother, Vanita Browder, tried to help him rebuild. She watched him study, attend therapy, and spend quiet evenings at home reading or listening to music. But there were days when he barely spoke, sitting for hours by the window, staring into the distance. He was free, yet the silence of solitary still echoed in his mind. Despite the pain, Khalif continued to fight for reform. He appeared on The View and in a documentary produced by Jay-Z, titled Time, The Khalif Browder Story. His courage moved millions. He spoke softly but firmly about what solitary confinement does to a person, how it strips away humanity minute by minute. "You can feel your mind leaving you," he said during one interview. "It's like dying slowly, but you keep waking up." Behind the camera, though, Khalif was fading. The attention and public appearances didn't bring peace. They reminded him of everything he lost. He struggled to adjust to the rhythm of freedom. Nights were hardest. He would wake drenched in sweat, haunted by the metallic clang of prison gates that weren't really there. In June 2015, the weight became too heavy. Khalif was found dead in his home. He had taken his own life. He was only 22. The news stunned the nation. It wasn't just a tragedy, it was an indictment. America had failed him twice. First by imprisoning an innocent boy, then by leaving him alone to fight the trauma it caused. His mother's cries filled the small Bronx apartment that day. She had spent years fighting for his release, believing that once he was home, the worst was over. Instead, she found herself burying her son. "They destroyed my baby," she said through tears at his funeral. "They took his spirit and then they took his life." The story spread across every major news outlet. Celebrities, politicians, and civil rights groups expressed outrage. President Barack Obama, in an open letter that same year, referenced Khalif's ordeal as an example of why solitary confinement must end for juveniles. The United Nations Human Rights Council cited his case in reports on the psychological damage caused by isolation. But more than speeches and sympathy, real change began to take shape. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio announced a ban on solitary confinement for inmates under 21 at Rikers Island, calling it the Khalif Browder Rule. Bail reform became a national topic, leading to new policies that limited pretrial detention for nonviolent offenders. Across the country, activists began chanting his name at rallies, "Justice for Khalif." His death, though heartbreaking, became a catalyst. It forced America to look at its prisons not as places of justice, but as warehouses of pain. Documentaries, investigative reports, and public hearings exposed decades of neglect, racism, and indifference within the system. Khalif's story gave voice to thousands who had been forgotten. Young men and women who had vanished into cells without trial, without money, without hope. 2 years later, in 2017, his mother Vanita passed away from heart failure. Friends and family said she died of a broken heart. Before her death, she established the Khalif Browder Foundation, dedicated to supporting families affected by wrongful incarceration and advocating for bail reform. Today, that foundation continues her fight, ensuring that Khalif's name lives on as a reminder and a warning. Jay-Z, who produced the documentary, said in a public statement, "Khalif Browder is every young black man in America. The story isn't just his, it's ours. His life mattered." Khalif's story became a cornerstone in the modern prison reform movement, taught in schools, studied in law classes, and discussed in policy rooms. He may have died young, but his legacy reshaped national consciousness. Every year, new reports on solitary confinement and pretrial detention trace their inspiration back to him. His courage, the refusal to plead guilty, the insistence on truth, continues to echo through a system still learning to face itself. In the end, Khalif Browder's life asks one haunting question: how many more must be lost before justice truly changes? The boy who vanished behind bars never saw his reform laws passed, never witnessed the world awakening to his truth. But his voice, quiet, unwavering, and painfully human, remains a light for all who have been silenced.